The polished gleam of silver on linen, the soft clinking of crystal, the low hum of entitled conversations. This was the world Ilara orbited, a ghost in a borrowed apron. Tonight, however, the background noise sharpened into a single, grating voice. Damian Blackwood, a man whose net worth was a headline and whose temper was a legend, dissected her every move. His words were not just complaints. They were scalpels, intended to carve away at her composure. Is it truly so difficult to pour water without sloshing it like a stable hand? He sneered, his voice a whip crack in the hushed, elegant space of Aria. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, the heat of their judgment prickling her skin. This wasn't about service. It was a display of power, a public dissection of a person he deemed insignificant, a piece of furniture that had dared to wobble. Before we begin, take a moment and comment your city below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now let's dive in. The restaurant, Aria, was a theater of wealth, and Ilara, a 24-year-old art student drowning in debt, was merely part of the scenery. Her life was a frantic juggling act. Classes during the day, where she wrestled with abstract concepts of form and color, and nights at Aria, where she performed the concrete choreography of subservience. Each table was a miniature kingdom, ruled by patrons accustomed to immediate, flawless service. Ilara had learned the script and the steps, the precise angle to pour wine, the silent replacement of a fallen napkin, the deferential nod that was both an apology and an erasure of self. She was good at it, a phantom flitting between worlds, her own aspirations tucked away like a worn photograph in a locket. Her dream was to paint, to capture the raw, unfiltered emotions of the city on canvas, the bruised purple of a twilight sky, the desperate hope in a street performer's eyes, the weary slump of a commuter's shoulders. But the cost of paints, canvas, and crushing student loans meant she spent her nights serving people who saw art as an investment, a status symbol to be hung on a wall and forgotten. Damian Blackwood was a regular, a titan of the financial world who treated Aria as his personal court. He was sharp-featured and impeccably dressed in bespoke suits that cost more than her entire year's tuition. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing and forgave less. To him, the staff were not people. They were functions, extensions of the restaurant's machinery. A fork out of place, a wine glass not polished to a perfect, streak-free sheen, a moment's hesitation. All were personal affronts, failures in a system he paid to be perfect. His companions, a rotating cast of sycophantic business associates and younger women with guarded, hungry eyes, never met his gaze for long. They were accessories to his power, silent witnesses to his casual cruelty, their laughter a little too loud, their agreement a little too quick. Tonight, Damian's dissatisfaction was a palpable force, a cold front moving through the warm, golden light of the dining room. It began with the amuse-bouche, which he dismissed with a flick of his wrist. Tell the chef the foam is a textural catastrophe. It has the consistency of dish soap. Ilara relayed the message, her voice a carefully calibrated neutral, though the chef, a fiery man named Marco, merely slammed a pan onto a burner. She knew the foam was perfect, a delicate cloud of saffron and citrus. Damian's complaint was not about the food, but about the assertion of dominance, the opening move in a chess game only he was playing. Next, it was the wine. He swirled the deep red liquid in his glass, held it to the light, and declared it insipid. It was a $2,000 bottle of Chateau Margaux, a vintage so revered that the sommelier himself, a man usually composed to the point of catatonia, had presented it with trembling hands. "It lacks character," Damian pronounced, his gaze sweeping the room as if daring anyone to disagree. Much like the service, Ilara felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the slow, cold dread that accompanied every interaction with Table 7. She was a pawn in his game, a proxy for his dissatisfaction with a world that occasionally, stubbornly, refused to bend to his will. She moved with practiced precision, her steps measured, her expression a careful mask of professional deference she had spent months perfecting. She refilled his water glass, her hand steady despite the tremor she felt inside. It was then that he chose to escalate, his voice dropping to a low, menacing purr. "Are you incapable of performing the simplest of tasks?" he asked, not looking at her, but at his guest, a young man whose face was pale with discomfort. "This glass is now contaminated by your incompetence." He pushed it to the edge of the table, a silent, damning judgment. The other diners pretended not to notice, their conversations faltering for a moment before resuming with forced, brittle casualness. But Ilara saw the furtive glances, the smirks of some, the pity of others. It was the pity that stung the most. It reinforced her powerlessness, her role as the designated victim in this nightly drama. She picked up the glass, her fingers brushing against the cold, condensation-slicked surface. "My apologies, sir," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I will bring you a fresh one." Her retreat to the kitchen was a walk of shame, each step a testament to her humiliation. The polished floor seemed to stretch for miles, the journey a gauntlet of silent judgment. In the relative sanctuary of the kitchen, amidst the clatter of pans and the hiss of the grill, Marco shot her a look of sympathy. "Don't let him get to you, kid," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "He's a miserable old bastard who gets off on making others feel small. I hear his son won't even speak to him." Ilara offered a weak smile, her gratitude for his words a small, warm flicker in the cold emptiness of her chest. But his words were a bomb, not a shield. The night was far from over, and Damien Blackwood was not a man to be satisfied with a single victory. As the main course was served, Damien's scrutiny intensified. He dissected his steak with surgical precision, examining each bite as if searching for a fatal flaw. He found it, of course, or rather, he invented it. "This is medium rare, not medium," he announced, the steak impaled on his fork like a casualty of war. "A chef who cannot discern the difference between shades of pink should not be in a kitchen of this caliber. Take it back." Ilara knew it was a lie. She had stood by the pass, had watched Marco check the temperature himself, had seen the flush of perfectly cooked meat. But to argue would be professional suicide. "I will have the chef prepare another for you immediately, sir," she said, her voice a monotone of practiced submission. As she reached for the plate, her hand brushed against his. The contact was fleeting, accidental. But his reaction was instantaneous and visceral. He recoiled as if burned, his face contorting into a mask of disgust. "Don't touch me," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that cut through the ambient noise like a shard of glass. The words, though quiet, were a physical blow. They struck her with the force of a slap, the raw, unadulterated contempt in his tone, a poison that seeped into her very bones. It was a line crossed, a violation of the unspoken contract between server and diner. He had not just criticized her work, he had denigrated her person, her very existence. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. The clatter of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, the rhythmic pulse of the jazz trio in the corner. It all faded into a distant hum. All she could see was his face, the cruel twist of his lips, the cold, dead light in his eyes. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The carefully constructed walls of her professional deference, built brick by brick over years of swallowed insults and forced smiles, began to crumble. A spark of defiance, long dormant, flickered to life. She stood her ground, her hand still hovering over the rejected plate. "I did not touch you, sir," she said, her voice quiet but firm, a sliver of steel in the velvet of her tone. "My hand merely grazed yours as I was performing my duties." His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine surprise in their icy depths. He was not accustomed to being contradicted, especially not by someone he considered so far beneath him. A dark flush crept up his neck, a storm gathering on the horizon of his face. "Are you calling me a liar?" he demanded, his voice rising, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. The pretense of civility was gone, stripped away to reveal the raw, ugly reality of their interaction. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. Every instinct, honed by years of needing this job, screamed at her to retreat, to apologize, to placate the raging beast before her. But the spark of defiance had caught fire, fanned by years of silent endurance, of swallowed pride, of dreams deferred. The faces of her paintings flashed in her mind, the weary, the resilient, the proud. She owed it to them, and to herself, to stand tall. "I am not calling you anything, sir," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I am simply stating a fact." The silence that followed was a living thing, a palpable entity that filled the space between them. The entire restaurant was now watching, their conversations silenced, their forks poised mid-air. It was a showdown, a clash of two worlds, the powerful and the powerless, the master and the servant. And in that moment, Ilara, the broke art student, the phantom in a borrowed apron, was no longer powerless. She had found her voice, and in the heart of the lion's den, she had chosen to use it. The storm broke. "You insolent little brat!" Damien roared, his voice echoing through the cavernous dining room. He surged to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The question hung in the air, a testament to his inflated ego, his belief that his wealth and status made him untouchable, infallible. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Blackwood," Ilara replied, her voice gaining strength, drawing from a well of courage she never knew she possessed. "You're a man who confuses wealth with worth. A man who believes that money gives you the right to treat people like dirt. You're a bully, a coward who preys on those you deem weaker than yourself." The words, once spoken, could not be unsaid. They hung in the air, a challenge and a condemnation. Damien stood there, his face a mask of incandescent rage, his fists clenched at his sides. He was a man accustomed to command, to obedience, to a world that bent to his will. He was not accustomed to being seen, truly seen, for the small, hollow man he was. The restaurant manager, a man named Philip, who moved with the silent, obsequious grace of a ghost, materialized at Damien's elbow. "Mr. Blackwood, please," he whispered, his voice a desperate plea for a return to the comfortable fiction of civility. "Let's not cause a scene." Damien shook him off, his eyes still locked on Ilara. "A scene?" he bellowed, his voice dripping with venom. This nothing has the audacity to lecture me on my character? She is a servant, a replaceable cog in a machine I could buy and sell before breakfast." He turned to Philip, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Fire her, now, or I will ruin this restaurant. I will buy it and turn it into a parking garage. Do you understand me?" Philip, his face pale and beaded with sweat, turned to Ilara, his eyes a mixture of pity and terror. "Ilara, you're fired," he said, his voice barely audible. "Please, just go." Ilara looked at him, then back at Damien, a strange sense of calm settling over her. She had lost her job, her only source of income, but she had gained something far more valuable: her self-respect. She untied her apron, the symbol of her servitude, and laid it on the table in front of Damien. It landed softly on the pristine white linen, a small, defiant stain. "You can have your world, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I hope you enjoy the view from the top. It must be very lonely up there." She turned and walked away, her head held high, the silence of the restaurant a testament to the power of her words. She did not look back. She did not need to. She knew what she would see. A room full of people who had witnessed a moment of truth. A man who had been stripped of his power. And a world that, for a fleeting moment, had been turned upside down. The next morning, the sun rose on a city oblivious to the small drama that had played out in the hushed confines of Aria. Ilara woke up in her small, cluttered apartment, the smell of turpentine and oil paint a comforting familiarity. For a moment, she felt a wave of euphoria, a thrilling sense of lightness. Then the cold reality crashed over her. She was unemployed. Her rent was due next week. Her student loan payments were a relentless ticking clock. A knot of panic tightened in her stomach. What had she done? She spent the morning painting, not out of inspiration, but out of desperation, channeling her fear and uncertainty into the canvas. The colors were chaotic, angry, a maelstrom of emotion. She painted the city as she saw it that morning. A predator, all sharp angles and gaping mouths, ready to swallow her whole. She painted the loneliness of the crowded subway, the quiet desperation of the street corner vendor, the defiant joy of a child playing in a fountain. She painted the world she knew, the world Damian Blackwood would never see. Around noon, her phone buzzed. It was a text from a former co-worker, Maria. "You will not believe what is happening at Aria," it read, followed by a string of exclamation points. A photo followed. A gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom, parked directly in front of the restaurant's entrance, blocking it completely. It was an act of such petulant, theatrical arrogance that it was almost comical. The license plate was a simple, stark statement. Blackwood. A slow, bitter smile spread across Ilara's face. He was trying to make a point, to demonstrate his power, to show the world that he could not be defied. But all he was showing was his pettiness, his childish inability to handle a bruised ego. He thought he was laying siege to her former workplace, but he was really just revealing the poverty of his own soul. Her phone buzzed again, and again. A group chat with her former colleagues was exploding. Some were furious, others were scared for their jobs. A few were secretly cheering her on. The incident was already being filmed by news crews. She put down her paintbrush, a sense of purpose solidifying within her. She was not going to let him have the last word. She was not going to let him intimidate her, or the people she had worked with. She was going to confront him. Not as a waitress, not as a victim, but as an equal. She put on her paint-splattered jeans and a clean t-shirt, grabbed her portfolio of sketches, her only real armor, and headed out the door. The battle was not over. It had just begun. The scene at Aria was one of controlled chaos. A crowd of onlookers had gathered, a sea of upturned faces and glowing phone screens, capturing the audacious display of wealth and arrogance. The police were there, their flashing lights a futile gesture against the sheer, immovable bulk of the Rolls-Royce. Damian Blackwood sat in the back, a silhouette behind the tinted windows, a king in his mobile fortress, observing the chaos he had created. Ilara pushed her way through the crowd, her portfolio clutched to her chest like a shield. "Excuse me," she muttered, squeezing past a man filming on his phone. The air was thick with a mixture of outrage and amusement. She heard snippets of conversation. "Can you believe the nerve? Serves the restaurant right, probably. Who is he?" She walked up to the car, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She knocked on the window. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We need to talk." The window slid down with a soft electronic hum, revealing Damian's face. He looked surprised to see her, a flicker of something unreadable, annoyance, respect, in his eyes. "You have a lot of nerve," he said, his voice a low growl. "And you have a lot of money," she retorted, her voice sharp. "But it can't buy you everything. It can't buy you respect, and it certainly can't buy you the right to treat people like they don't matter. I can buy and sell you 1,000 times over, he sneered, his arrogance a familiar cloak. You can't buy my art, she said, opening her portfolio. You can't buy this. She pulled out the first sketch. It was a charcoal drawing of a man sitting alone in a restaurant, surrounded by luxury, his face a mask of profound, aching loneliness. The man was him. He stared at the drawing, his carefully constructed composure cracking for a moment. He saw not the powerful tycoon, but the empty shell of a man she had captured on paper. Before he could speak, she pulled out another sketch. This one was of a young boy, standing in the shadow of a towering, imposing man, the boy's face a mixture of fear and a desperate desire for approval. And you can't buy this back, she said softly. He flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement. But she saw it. He saw the truth. A truth he had spent a lifetime trying to outrun. A truth he had buried under layers of wealth and power. What do you want? He asked, his voice softer, the bluster gone, replaced by a raw, ragged weariness. I want you to see people, she said, her voice filled with a passion that transcended their personal conflict. I want you to see the stories behind the faces, the dreams behind the uniforms. I want you to understand that everyone has a life as vivid and complex as your own. She took a deep breath, the words pouring out of her, a torrent of emotion and conviction. I don't want your money, Mr. Blackwood. I don't want your apology. I want you to look at the people you dismiss so easily and see them. Really see them. She closed her portfolio, her point made. Now, are you going to move your car, or are you going to sit here all day, proving to the world what a small, pathetic man you really are? She turned and walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The charcoal sketches a silent, damning indictment of his life. The crowd parted for her, their faces a mixture of awe and respect. She had not won a battle of wealth or power, but of something far more profound, a battle of humanity. And in that battle, she was a giant. Damien watched her go. The images of the sketches burned into his mind. He had been so sure of his power, so confident in his ability to control the world around him. But this young woman, this artist, had held up a mirror to his soul. And he had not liked what he had seen. He picked up his phone and made a call. Move the car, he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual arrogance. He then made another call, this one to a number he had not dialed in years, a number that belonged to his son. It went to voicemail. Daniel, he began, his voice cracking. It's your father. I need to talk to you. It was time to face the ghosts of his past, the choices that had led him to this moment, this empty, gilded cage of his own making. The road to redemption was long and uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, Damien Blackwood was ready to take the first step. The days that followed were a strange, unsettling limbo for Damien. The incident at Aria had gone viral, a modern-day parable of the powerful versus the powerless. He was a caricature of the out-of-touch billionaire, a villain in a story he had unwittingly authored. His carefully curated public image was in tatters, his name a punchline in late-night monologues and a source of outrage on social media. His phone rang incessantly with calls from his PR team, his board of directors, his lawyers. They all had the same advice: issue a public apology, make a donation to a charity for aspiring artists, lay low until the storm passed. But Damien ignored them all. He knew a hollow apology would be seen for what it was, a calculated move to salvage his reputation. He knew a donation would be dismissed as a bribe, a pathetic attempt to buy forgiveness. He knew that laying low would be an act of cowardice, a retreat into the shadows of his own making. He found himself drawn back to Ilara's sketches, the charcoal lines a haunting reminder of his own emptiness. He had them framed and hung on the wall of his sterile, minimalist penthouse, a stark contrast to the abstract, investment-grade art that usually adorned his walls. They were a constant, silent accusation, a reminder of the man he had become. He began to watch people, not as functions, not as obstacles or opportunities, but as individuals. He sat on park benches, in crowded coffee shops, on the subway, a ghost in his own city. He saw the weariness in the eyes of the single mother juggling 2 jobs and a sick child. He saw the hope in the face of the young entrepreneur pitching his dream to a skeptical investor. He saw the quiet dignity of the street musician, his music a defiant cry against the indifference of the world. He saw the stories Ilara had talked about, the intricate, messy, beautiful tapestry of human existence. He also began to confront the ghosts of his past. He drove to the cemetery and stood before the grave of his wife, Eleanor, a woman he had loved but had never truly known, a woman whose gentle spirit he had crushed under the weight of his own ambition. "I'm sorry, Ellie," he whispered, the words lost in the wind. "I'm so sorry." He finally called his son back, and this time Daniel answered. The conversation was stilted, awkward, punctuated by long, uncomfortable silences. Damien apologized, not for any specific transgression, but for the entirety of their broken relationship. Daniel was skeptical, his voice cold and distant, but he agreed to meet for coffee. It was a start, a tentative bridge across a chasm of years of neglect and misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Ilara's life had been turned upside down. The story of her confrontation with Damien had made her a local celebrity. She was inundated with interview requests, job offers, even a few tentative inquiries from art galleries. She turned them all down. She had not sought fame, and she was wary of its seductive, corrosive power. She wanted her art to speak for itself, not to be a footnote to a sensationalized news story. She used the newfound freedom from her waitressing job to throw herself into her work. She painted with a ferocity she had never known, her canvases filled with the raw, unfiltered emotions of the city she loved. Her small apartment became a gallery of her own making, a testament to her vision and her talent. One afternoon, a courier arrived with a large, flat package. There was no return address, but Ilara knew who it was from. She opened it to find a state-of-the-art easel, a set of the finest oil paints, and a collection of brushes that made her gasp. Tucked inside was a small, handwritten note. "A true artist should have the best tools," it read. No strings attached. It was signed simply, DB. Ilara stared at the gift, a knot of conflicting emotions tightening in her chest. It was a grand gesture, a classic billionaire move, but there was something in the simple, unadorned note that felt different. It was not an apology, not an attempt to buy her forgiveness. It was a quiet acknowledgement of her talent, a recognition of her as an artist. She was tempted to send it back, to reject his attempt to insinuate himself into her life. But she knew that would be an act of pride, a mirror image of his own arrogance. She had told him to see people, to understand their stories. To reject his gift would be to deny him the chance to do just that. She kept the easel and the paints, a silent acceptance of his gesture, a tentative truce in their unspoken war. A few weeks later, another package arrived. This time, it was a first-edition copy of a book on the life and work of Käthe Kollwitz, a German artist known for her powerful, empathetic depictions of the poor and the suffering. It was Ilara's favorite artist, a fact she had never mentioned to anyone. How could he have known? Then she remembered a brief conversation with Maria at the restaurant, months ago, about artists who inspired her. He must have tracked Maria down, asked her. The thought was both unsettling and strangely touching. Tucked inside the book was another note, this one even shorter than the last. "I'm starting to see," it read. Ilara felt a flicker of something she could not quite name. It was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was a crack in the wall of her anger, a chink in the armor of her righteous indignation. He was trying, in his own clumsy, halting way, to understand. He was trying to see the world through her eyes. The packages continued to arrive, each one a carefully chosen, deeply personal gesture. A collection of rare pigments from a small, family-owned shop in Florence, a subscription to a small independent art magazine, tickets to a retrospective of the works of Gordon Parks, a photographer who had documented the lives of the poor and marginalized with unflinching honesty and profound compassion. Each gift was a silent conversation, a dialogue between two people who had started as adversaries and were slowly, tentatively, becoming something else. Ilara never responded, never acknowledged the gifts. But she used the pigments, read the magazines, went to the retrospective. She allowed his gestures to be what they were, a quiet, consistent effort to bridge the chasm between their worlds. One day, a letter arrived. It was not a package, but a simple handwritten letter on heavy cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was neat, precise, the words carefully chosen. "Dear Ilara," it began. "I know that my actions have caused you a great deal of pain, and for that, I am truly sorry. I know that these words are not enough, that they cannot undo the hurt I have caused. But I need you to know that my apology is not for the public, not for my reputation, but for you. But you were right. I was a bully, a coward, a man who had lost his way. I had built a fortress of wealth and power around myself, a fortress that was also a prison. You, a stranger, a young woman with more courage and integrity in her little finger than I had in my entire being, you showed me the door. You gave me a glimpse of a world I had forgotten existed, a world of empathy, of connection, of art that matters. I have spent the last few weeks trying to see that world, to understand it. I have visited the places you paint, the people you see. I have started to read the books you love, to listen to the music that moves you. I am a poor student, a clumsy beginner, but I am trying. My son and I are talking again. It is difficult, but it is real. You did that. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I would like to see you again. Not as a billionaire and a waitress, but as two people who have been brought together by a strange, unexpected twist of fate. I would like to show you something. Something I think you will understand. If you are willing, please meet me at the old waterfront warehouse on Pier 4 this Saturday at sunset. If you don't come, I will understand. Sincerely, Damian Blackwood. Ilara read the letter 3 times, her heart a tumultuous sea of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to tear it up, to throw it away, to erase him from her life forever. He had hurt her, humiliated her, and no amount of expensive gifts or eloquent apologies could change that. But another part of her was intrigued. She saw in his words a genuine, painful honesty, a flicker of true remorse. He was not making excuses, not trying to justify his behavior. He was simply trying. She thought of her own art, of her belief in the power of empathy, of her conviction that everyone, even a man like Damian Blackwood, had a story worth telling. To refuse to meet him would be to betray her own deepest values. It would be to declare him irredeemable, a monster beyond the reach of grace. And that was a judgment she was not willing to make. On Saturday, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, Ilara made her way to Pier 4. The warehouse was a cavernous, derelict space, its windows broken, its walls covered in faded graffiti. It was a place of forgotten things, a monument to the city's industrial past. She found Damien standing in the middle of the vast, empty space, a solitary figure in the fading light. He was not dressed in his usual expensive suit, but in a simple pair of jeans and a worn leather jacket. He looked older, more vulnerable, stripped of the armor of his wealth. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual booming authority. "You said you had something to show me," she replied, her voice cautious, her arms crossed over her chest. He nodded and led her to a corner of the warehouse where a large, dust-covered tarp was draped over a collection of objects. He pulled back the tarp, revealing a collection of canvases, some stretched, some rolled, all covered in a thick layer of grime. "My wife was a painter," he said, his voice thick with an emotion Ilara had never heard from him before. She was like you. She saw the world in a way I never could. She painted not what she saw, but what she felt. She painted the light in the darkness, the hope in the despair. He picked up one of the canvases and gently wiped away the dust with the sleeve of his jacket, revealing a painting of a young girl, her face illuminated by a single candle, her eyes filled with a fierce, defiant hope. The brushstrokes were bold, the colors vibrant, the emotion raw and undeniable. It was a masterpiece. "I didn't understand her art," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought it was sentimental. I encouraged her to paint things that would sell. Landscapes, portraits of the wealthy. I wanted her to be successful, to be part of my world. I didn't realize I was killing her spirit. One brushstroke at a time." He looked at Ilara, his eyes filled with a profound, soul-deep regret. "She died 10 years ago. A heart attack, the doctors said. But I know the truth. She died of a broken heart. I broke it." He gestured to the collection of canvases. "This is all that's left of her. Her art, her soul. I hid it away, buried it in this warehouse, because I couldn't bear to look at it. I couldn't bear to face what I had done." He turned back to Ilara, his face a mask of anguish. "When you showed me your sketch, when you talked about seeing the stories behind the faces, you were speaking her language. You were reminding me of the woman I had lost, the woman I had failed." Tears streamed down his face. Silent, unashamed. "I know I can never bring her back. I know I can never undo the damage I have done. But I can honor her memory. I can try to be the man she always believed I could be." He looked at Ilara, his eyes pleading. "I want to turn this warehouse into a gallery, a space for artists like you, for artists who see the world in a way I never could. I want to call it the Eleanor Gallery after her. I want you to be its first curator, its first featured artist. I want you to help me create a space where art that matters can be seen, where voices that are so often silenced can be heard." He paused, his voice choked with emotion. "I know this is a lot to ask. I know I have no right to ask it. But I am asking anyway. Please, Ilara, help me do something good. Help me build something beautiful out of the ruins of my life." The silence in the warehouse was broken only by the sound of Damien's ragged breathing and the distant cry of a seagull. Ilara stood there, stunned, the raw, painful honesty of his confession washing over her like a tidal wave. This was not a grand gesture, not a calculated move to salvage his reputation. This was a man laying his soul bare, offering her the broken pieces of his life and asking her to help him put them back together. She looked at the painting in his hands, at the fierce, defiant hope in the young girl's eyes. She saw in it a reflection of her own art, her own spirit. She saw the ghost of a woman she had never known, a woman who had been silenced, a woman whose voice deserved to be heard. She thought of her own dreams, of her desire to create a space for art that mattered, for stories that were so often ignored. He was offering her a chance to do just that, to turn her own personal pain into something beautiful, something transformative. She looked at Damien, at the tears streaming down his face, at the raw, unfiltered vulnerability in his eyes. She saw not the monster who had tormented her, but a man drowning in a sea of his own regret, a man desperately reaching for a lifeline. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. She reached out and took the painting from his hands, her fingers brushing against his. This time, he did not flinch. He did not pull away. He simply stood there, his hand in hers. A silent, fragile connection between two broken people who had found in each other an unexpected, undeserved, and yet undeniable grace. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with her own unshed tears. "Yes, I'll help you." The months that followed were a blur of activity, a whirlwind of construction dust, the smell of fresh paint, and the hum of creative energy. The old warehouse was transformed, its broken windows replaced with vast panes of glass that flooded the space with natural light, its graffiti-covered walls painted a stark, clean white. It became a sanctuary, a cathedral of art, a testament to the power of a shared vision. Ilara and Damien worked side by side, their relationship evolving from one of wary allies to one of deep, abiding friendship. They argued over wall colors and lighting fixtures, debated the merits of different artists, and shared stories over late-night cups of coffee. He learned about her childhood, her struggles, her dreams. She learned about his, the pressures that had shaped him, the fears that had driven him, the love that he had lost. He was a different man, stripped of his arrogance, his bluster, his need to control. He was quieter, more thoughtful, a keen and respectful observer of the world he had once so casually dismissed. He listened more than he spoke, his questions insightful, his comments laced with a newfound humility. He treated everyone, from the construction workers to the artists they considered, with a quiet, unassuming respect. Ilara, too, was transformed. The anger and resentment that had fueled her for so long had been replaced by a sense of purpose, a quiet joy in the act of creation. She was no longer just an artist. She was a builder, a collaborator, a curator of dreams. She had found her voice, not in defiance, but in creation. The Eleanor Gallery opened on a crisp autumn evening, the air filled with the scent of wood smoke and the excited chatter of the city's art community. The space was packed, a vibrant, eclectic mix of established artists, emerging talents, curious patrons, and the people whose stories Ilara had so often painted. The street vendors, the subway musicians, the single mothers, the dreamers. The gallery's inaugural exhibition was a retrospective of Eleanor Croft's work, her powerful, empathetic paintings finally given the audience they deserved. They were hung alongside Ilara's own canvases, a dialogue between two artists who had never met, but who shared a common vision, a common soul. Damien stood in the corner, a quiet observer of the scene he had helped to create. He watched as people from all walks of life, from the city's wealthiest patrons to its most marginalized residents, stood before his late wife's paintings, their faces a mixture of awe, of recognition, of shared humanity. He saw tears in their eyes, heard the hushed whispers of their admiration. He saw his son, Daniel, standing before a portrait of a homeless man, his face a mask of profound respect. They had had many difficult conversations, but tonight, Daniel put a hand on his father's shoulder. "She would be so proud, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Of this, and of you." Damien also saw Marco, the fiery chef from Aria, his arms crossed, a slow, grudging smile on his face. He saw Philip, the terrified manager, now a quiet supporter of the gallery's mission. He felt a hand on his arm and turned to see Ilara, her face glowing, her eyes shining with a light that seemed to come from within. "She would have loved this," she said, her voice soft. He nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yes," he whispered. She would have. He looked at her, at the young woman who had shattered his world, and then helped him to rebuild it. He saw not a waitress, not a victim, not an employee, but a partner, a friend, a savior. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with a gratitude that went far beyond words. "Thank you for everything." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "You did this, Damien," she said. "You chose to see. You chose to change. You chose to build something beautiful." They stood there for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had taken together, the chasm they had crossed. It was not a love story, not in the traditional sense. It was something deeper, something more profound. It was a story of redemption, of forgiveness, of the transformative power of art and empathy. Later that evening, after the crowds had thinned and the last of the champagne had been poured, a young woman approached Ilara. She was a journalist from a local arts magazine, her eyes bright with a fierce, intelligent curiosity. "This is an incredible story," she said, her voice filled with a genuine admiration. "A ruthless billionaire, a defiant waitress, a secret past. It's like something out of a movie. But there's one thing I don't understand." "What's that?" Ilara asked, her smile warm and inviting. "Forgiveness," the journalist said, her brow furrowed in thought. "He humiliated you. He tried to destroy you. How could you forgive him?" Ilara was silent for a moment, her gaze drifting to a painting on the far wall. It was one of her own, a portrait of a man sitting alone at a table in a fancy restaurant, his face a mask of loneliness and despair. It was the sketch that had started it all. "I didn't forgive him for his sake," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I did it for my own." Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It consumes you, it corrodes you, it turns you into the very thing you despise. She turned back to the journalist, her eyes clear and steady. "He was a man trapped in a prison of his own making. I didn't open the door for him. I just showed him where it was. He was the one who had to find the courage to walk through it." She paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting," she said, her voice gaining strength, a quiet authority in her tone. "It's about remembering, but choosing to let go of the pain. It's about recognizing the humanity in someone, even when they've shown you their worst. It's about choosing hope over despair, connection over anger, creation over destruction." The journalist was silent, her pen poised over her notepad, her eyes wide with a dawning understanding. She had come for a story about a billionaire and a waitress, but she had found something much more profound, a lesson in the messy, complicated, and ultimately beautiful art of being human. As the last of the guests departed, leaving the gallery quiet and still, Ilara and Damien stood together in the soft glow of the track lighting, surrounded by the silent, powerful testament of Eleanor's art. "So what's next?" Damien asked, his voice a low rumble in the quiet space. Ilara smiled, a slow, thoughtful smile. "I don't know," she admitted. "But for the first time in a very long time, I'm not afraid of the blank canvas." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet, unwavering strength. "We'll just have to paint it together." He returned her smile, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "I'd like that," he said, his voice soft. "I'd like that very much." They stood there for a long time, two unlikely souls bound by a shared past and a hopeful future. The silence between them filled not with anger or regret, but with the quiet, transformative power of a second chance. The story was not over. It was just beginning. And it was a story they would write together, one brushstroke, one act of kindness, one moment of shared humanity at a time. The world outside the gallery's windows was still a messy, complicated, often cruel place. But inside, in the quiet, sacred space they had built, there was light, there was hope, and there was the undeniable, transformative power of art that truly mattered. And that, they both knew, was more than enough. It was everything. This story reminds us that behind even the harshest person, there might be a hidden story of pain, and that one act of courage can change everything. It teaches us that empathy is a superpower, and forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to build something beautiful from the ruins. We'd love to know what you think in the comments. Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance? If Alara and Damien's journey moved you, please support our channel by hitting the like button and sharing this video. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story that touches the heart.